I'm Anne-Marie Mediwake, and I'm here with Lindsey Deluce and Kelsey McEwen. Welcome to CTV Your Morning, the podcast.
This week, we're taking a look at why U.S. President-elect Donald Trump has his eyes on Canada's water supply.
I also had the chance to sit down again with Keith Urban, my very favorite. We talked about new music, playing intimate shows, and a new world tour. It's got 8 Canadian dates.
But we're starting things off with some tech news concerning our neighbors to the south. TikTok is facing a ban in the U.S. and awaiting a decision by the U.S. Supreme Court on Sunday.
So what could this mean for the future of the platform and the 170 million people who use it in the States?
We had tech policy writer Izzy Lepowski explain.
So when most people really think of TikTok, they think of mindlessly scrolling their phone for hours, looking at funny videos. Why does the U.S. government view the app as a threat to national security?
Well, it's because of TikTok's ties to China, right? TikTok is owned by this larger company, ByteDance, which is based in China. It's spun out of a company that was founded in China. And for a long time, the U.S. government, and that includes President Trump, by the way, has said that, this poses too great a risk, a data privacy risk, a risk of China spreading propaganda through TikTok, a risk of it manipulating users in various ways or blackmailing them through the use of their data. And it hasn't been too specific about what those risks are or, what sorts of violations it has actually detected. But it's saying the risks are so high that we need to act now, given how widespread this app is in the United States.
And that's part of the reason that we're here today is ByteDance, the parent company of TikTok, says, hey, this is an infringement on free speech. The government has said, look, they have concerns about not only espionage and blackmail, like you mentioned, but they're also worried about the platform inciting violence and spreading misinformation. But ByteDance, of course, is refuting those claims. They say free speech is being infringed upon. What does the company and the government have to prove today?
So the company is trying to prove that the government has to abide by the First Amendment in this case, right? In the United States, we have the First Amendment. That First Amendment protects misinformation. It protects all kinds of really odious, ugly speech. And so the company is saying that under the First Amendment, that has to fly. The government has to prove that, in fact, it is not making a case about speech. The government is saying we are making a case about foreign adversary control of a very widespread application in the United States. And so they're trying to sidestep the whole question of speech and say, no, this is just really a question about corporate ownership. We are happy to allow TikTok to remain in the United States, provided that ByteDance sells it to a company that we're comfortable with.
Here in Canada in November, our federal government ordered to end TikTok's Canadian operations, but we didn't do a ban like we're seeing in the U.S. The app, for their part, has threatened to shut down on January 19th unless this ban is called off. So what could the ruling mean for the future of TikTok and its users?
The ruling obviously has widespread impacts for TikTok. It could mean that TikTok shuts down. There are tons of companies and creators that rely on TikTok, not just for fun, like you were talking about, but for their livelihoods, really. So it would create a massive reorientation of how those companies work. But there are larger implications for speech in the United States, right? A lot of First Amendment scholars and experts are really against this ban because they say that this would create, a slippery slope where the government can kind of waive this justification of national security to shut down all types of speech and speech platforms, whether that is a digital platform or a newspaper or what have you, that they don't like.
This is a really basic question, but I think it's important. If the ruling goes against TikTok, so they do have to live up to this law and either sell off their assets or shut down, what does that mean for people in America who want to scroll on TikTok?
Well, it will mean that if the ban does go into effect, if ByteDance refuses to divest, then poof, TikTok will disappear from app stores, and internet service providers, internet hosting providers will no longer be able to provide any services to it. So that it's not a direct ban on TikTok. Obviously, the government can't go into everybody's phone and delete it, but it can force the hosting providers not to work with TikTok, which in effect makes it impossible to operate it.
So sticking with U.S. news, obviously we've been covering just the devastating wildfires in L.A. It's been so hard to watch people lose everything, and that does also include the music industry.
Yeah, you know, so much of it is based there in LA, and we've been following along. There's been some big losses just in terms of things that are irreplaceable in that industry.
We've been talking a lot this morning, obviously, about the LA wildfires, and in LA is the music world. These fires have destroyed homes and studios with irreplaceable equipment. Also in music, meanwhile, some Songwriter of the Year nominees, they're boycotting Spotify's Grammy event over unfair royalties. So we've got a lot to talk about. We've got Emily Hanskamp, a music journalist, joining us again this morning. Great to have you back.
Always love being here.
So let's start in LA. The wildfires obviously have impacted so many people, but when we talk specifically about musicians and producers, not only have we seen their homes destroyed, but also personal studios filled with some pretty essential equipment. Music producers Bob Clearmountain, who's worked with huge musicians like Bruce Springsteen, and Canadian-born Greg Wells, who just worked on Wicked, both of them, irreplaceable gear, gone. That was central to their work. So we're seeing some of these pictures this morning. Emily, tell us more about what's happening.
I mean, you've been talking all week, all morning. You know, the fires are ongoing. The extent of the damage, financial and otherwise, we don't know yet. But it's important to pay attention to how this is uniquely affecting musicians. Because if you think about, you know, that's on one side of the spectrum. But working musicians, that's their instruments. It's their livelihood. They might have custom equipment. They might have equipment, let's say a grand piano. Picture that. You can't move these things even if you were given the evacuation notice that you needed. So while we're talking about the sentimental and the financial loss, we also have to think that they might not have the safety blanket in terms of professional working musicians that other people do in terms of insurance and benefits. So yes, we have financial loss, we have sentimental loss, but we also have cultural loss in terms of musicians not having access to their art, their records, their studios, and that's something it's going to have ripple effects for quite some time.
There have been several relief initiatives launched, including MusiCares pledging $1 million.
Yeah.
So what kind of efforts are there to help these musicians?
Yes, so there's so much mobility right now. MusiCare is the charitable arm of the Recording Academy. I'll add that the Grammys did just announce that they will be going forward with their ceremony, but it's going to be sort of double as a tribute and a fundraising initiative as well. So they're going to be both honoring the first responders and trying to, raise relief funds for the people who have been evacuated, displaced, and for these musicians who have lost their livelihoods, right? There's a spreadsheet that is circulating right now among the industry where it's public and it's artists, musicians, audio engineers, tour managers who basically they're putting in what they've lost, and they have GoFundMes, so you can check that out. Over 200 artists last time I checked this morning, where they're just sort of grassroots trying to get the funds they need to just get a jump start. Kelsey, to get that guitar, sometimes just to be able to go on tour, for example. I mean, it's the bare minimum here.
You mentioned the Grammys. There's also controversy surrounding the Grammys because there are some nominees for Songwriter of the Year who are saying we're not coming, we're not attending, we're not performing at Spotify's Grammy party on January 28th. So these are people who are responsible for the songs that we can't stop singing, like Amy Allen, who co-wrote Sabrina Carpenter's Espresso. What's going on here?
Yeah, so I think, we've seen these conversations and criticism deservedly being heightened recently as Spotify just had their record year for profits while reducing the royalties specifically last year for songwriters, which resulted in a $150 million decrease in royalties. Add to that, streams generally about 3 cents to 5 cents we're seeing reported for streams. This is not a livelihood artists can, live off of. So the songwriters who were nominated, who were invited to this Spotify ceremony said, absolutely not, we're not going. Some have explicitly said it's because of this royalty structure. So something's got to give, Kelsey. It's getting so extreme. It is not a way that they can build a life. Spotify continues to build millions, and we need to see some change. I'm happy to see some boycotts. Hope it'll make a difference.
Speaking of change, Justin Bieber changing things up, reportedly making a return to music in 2025. What do we know so far?
Yeah, it's going to be a good year, I think, for Bieber fans. I mean, it's been 4 years since, his last album, Justice. And in that time, he's gone through some emotional, ups and downs. He had a baby with his wife, Hailey Bieber. He had to cancel his 2023 tour, Justice Tour, because he had Ramsay Hunt syndrome. Remember when half his face was paralyzed? He was suffering through some physical health issues. But now there are reports he's back in the studio. We saw some pictures of him with indie artist producer McGee. He's making music. It seems that 2025 is the year projected for both release of new music, and there's some rumors about a tour potentially. So Bieber fans, buckle up and get ready.
Listen, I don't often say I'm a Bieber fan, but I will say I'm a Bieber fan.
There we go.
I'm excited.
Kelsey's ready. Yeah.
Amazing. Emily, thanks so much for being here.
Always a pleasure.
And new music also means some new tours. Country superstar Keith Urban's newest album, High, promises something for all of his fans. I had the awesome chance to sit down with him to talk about the inspiration behind it, what fans can expect when he hits the road, and what artist he just can't stop listening to. Well, Keith, last time we talked, it was 2020. It was a whole other world.
Yeah.
We were in our respective houses, meeting over video. I think I had like a blanket on my lap.
You did?
Yeah, during the interview.
Yeah.
Now here we are. It's good
Because you
to
could.
see
You should have the blanket again. I'd feel better.
Well, now I got the record.
That'll
even
do.
better. Even better.
They're all comfort.
It's good to see you.
You too.
I'm not the only one who gets to see you. You are about to go on tour, and you are going right across Canada. You're going to North America.
Going
We're going to
everywhere.
Australia. So how does it feel to get back on the road for a big tour?
I love it. Especially with this album because it's a very energetic record, so it'll be fun to tour on it.
What goes into planning a tour like this one?
Right now, putting a band together. I'm in the midst of doing that. Conceiving all the production and that sort of thing. And then the set list. It's a challenge. Having as many songs as we have, it's a blessing and a challenge.
Oh yeah.
To figure out what to play.
I was searching. I'm like, how many songs does Keith Urban have to nail it down? The number of songs that I know personally,
Right.
that your fans know and love, and then all of the brand new music. That must be such a puzzle to fit it all together.
Yeah, and then it unfolds as the tour goes on. You know, shuffling things around and rearranging. Yeah.
You've got some great names on the road with you. Chase Matthew, Carly Scott Collins,
Yeah.
Alana Springsteen.
Yeah.
They're great.
Oh yeah, it's going to be a fun group of people to be around the whole tour.
I love that they're all in their 20s and they're up and coming artists. They're making a name for themselves on the scene, but I love that you've included them too, because it really feels like, as a fan of yours, you've got a commitment to new artists as well when they're opening for you.
Yeah, I've been the recipient of that myself coming up. So it's always, Nashville's very communal, and I think with all the changes that have happened in the city in the last handful of years, that communal feeling is really important to hold on to, and I still feel that with all the artists.
There's something about mentorship, you know?
Yeah, and I mean, you're all learning from each other all the time. I'm learning from them, they're learning from me, and it never ends.
I first saw you in 2007, and I loved it. I loved every second of the show.
Thank you.
Canadians love you.
Feelings very mutual.
Well, I'm so glad.
Like
I'm
from
so
day
glad.
one, when I first came up here on my first album, I remember playing in a very small club, and I could just tell the audience, I'm like, oh, you get this, you get what I do, like, because it's I think it's a very, Canada, Australia is very, very similar, because we have big American influence, big sort of UK, Europe influence, but we also have our own thing. And so we sort of melt and fuse all that together. So when I came here, I felt that same sense of input, musical input and melting pot. And the audience felt it right away. So I've been a fan of Canada ever since.
Well, I think it shows when you look at the places you're stopping in Canada, like when you can pick spots in Saskatchewan and you go to not just one city, but you go to two.
Yeah.
That means something to Canadian fans, I think.
Yeah, and to me too, to get to as many places as we can, and not just the big capital cities. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I love that. You mentioned a smaller venue that you played when you first came to Canada.
Yeah.
And I think and correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like you have a love for these smaller venues that are kind of intimate but rocking, and you're right there with the fans.
Yeah.
What is it about that feels different for you than a big stadium?
Yeah, because we just played the Horseshoe Tavern here in Toronto last night. It's how I began. So there's a sort of it's the center and the DNA and the bones of everything I do is in those clubs still. And there's something about making sure that that's all still there and solid and good and real. And then you can add all the fancy stuff around it, but the center has to be there. And playing these clubs gives us a chance to recalibrate all that center and the audience and the song, because it's about songs. And it's about having a great time with the audience, and it's about everything really happening in front of you. And there's something wonderful about getting rid of all the lights, all the production, all the video, all the stuff, and taking it right back to just the center of it all.
I imagine hearing them, but seeing them sing your songs back to you.
Oh, it's amazing.
Yeah.
Especially new songs. I mean, we did stuff off the new record last night, and they knew every word. So.
Oh my God. Okay, well,
Yeah.
speaking of new songs,
Yeah.
Straight Line, can we talk about the single?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay, so Straight Line, I love 2 things about it. First up, I love the line, "We're finally leaving Hotel California," which is a great Eagles reference.
Thank you.
First off, I'll ask you, what does straight line mean for you?
You're just reclaiming your life. I mean, you can relate, right? There's a point where you have so many obligations and commitments in your life that you're just treading water. And you don't really have a choice. You have to take care of all the things you got to take care of. But at some point, you look around at your life and you're like, what happened to all the color and the fun that used to be my life? What happened? And sometimes a song can be just a moment of getting all that back again, just 3 minutes of being in heaven and having everything be good again, and you're free of all that stuff and you take your life back. That's what Straight Line's about.
I feel like I'm sitting here, I'm like, yes. Yes.
Yeah.
So I was lamenting to you about like all the stuff, and I'm like, this is the season of life I'm just in. It's really busy.
Yeah.
You're telling me there's a line, a straight line, and I'm going to get back on it.
Yeah, it's just a straight line back into your life where you take control again.
I love that.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. The other thing I love about it, because I mentioned 2 things I love about straight line. The other one is, have you seen online all of the line dances?
I have, yeah.
Yes! Oh my God, they're so good.
Straight line dances, I love it.
They're so good.
Yeah.
It is my
really
goal,
cool.
2025 goal this year, to nail that one.
Can you line dance at all?
Oh, I mean, a little bit.
Right.
So I'm a Calgary girl.
Yeah.
So I grew up going to country
Mandatory.
bars. Of course.
Right.
And the line dances always come on about midnight, so you're a few drinks in, but like
Right.
you make it happen.
What's your go-to jam back for line dancing? If you think of line dancing, what would be one of the classic songs for that?
The song I don't know, but it's the one that goes like heel, toe, and you do like a turn, and you
That
kick
sounds
and-
like all of them to me.
I mean, you're not wrong. You're not wrong. You just throw in a twirl, the cowboy hat. I feel like you're good to go. Keith, there's something about new music. I mean, you mentioned your new music. There's something about new music that's just so exciting as a fan. And so I want to know, for you, beyond your repertoire, when you listen to other artists, what new music have you been pumped about this year? What have you been listening to?
Chapel Roan, just
Really?
non-stop, yeah. Charlie XCX. I mean, I listen to stuff that has nothing to do with my music, but it's just excellent. There's an excellence about it that speaks to me musically, lyrically, melodically. You know, in the case of Chapel, they're just some of the best songs that are bulletproof. I mean, lots of them, not just 1 or 2. It's really exceptional.
I love what you say, though, that you connect with artists and you listen to artists that are different than you, because I feel like there was a time of our life where people would cross over. They'd start in one genre, they were very labeled, and then they'd try another genre. And I feel like today there's so much more blending. People try on different styles and they give us tastes of different things, like Beyonce with her country-themed album, Post Malone. You've had threads of rock, I feel like, through your music.
Yeah.
Do you feel like that's true? That it's more just music is, as opposed to genre labels?
I think there's more support for all the various ways you can blend it all together now. You know, it wasn't that long ago when it sort of had to have a certain combination to fit through the little portals. Now you've got so many outlets and ways for audiences to find their artist, that artists can make whatever music they want now and find audiences. Great.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Last question for you. I know you love your Preds. You're a big Nashville Predators fan.
Yeah, we just had a game a few nights ago.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah.
Listen, you got the bobblehead coming out
Yeah.
this weekend.
Yeah.
You sang the anthem before
I will
the
be.
games.
I'll be singing this as a Saturday, yes.
Amazing. Great
Yes.
to hear it.
Thank you.
So I got to know, are you a hockey spectator fan, or do you ever get on the ice and play yourself?
I can't skate.
No, really?
No, I know. It's
No.
amazing they let me in Canada. I shouldn't be allowed.
Listen, next time you're here.
Because then they go, where's your skates? And then your passport. That's the sequence.
That it has to be. So
think
next time
so.
you're here, we'll go skating. That's
Yeah.
what we'll do.
Okay, what could possibly go wrong?
Nothing at all. I'm going to hold you to it. Keith, thank you. We're so
pleasure.
happy to have you, and I'm
you.
so excited for everyone to see you right across Canada.
Me too, thank you.
Awesome.
Thanks for listening to Your Morning, the podcast. Every week, we're going to bring you some of the most interesting conversations from the show on a wide variety of topics. And as always, you can join us live weekdays 6 to 9 a.m. Eastern, 7 to 10 a.m. Atlantic on CTV CTV News Channel, or on the CTV News app.
Now, here's a question that's probably come up in your social gatherings. Will the United States come for more of Canada's water?
Well, we've been having this conversation for years, right? So the ongoing wildfires in LA obviously drawing new attention to Donald Trump's comments about Canada's water supply and who should get it.
The deadly and devastating wildfires in Los Angeles are drawing new attention to U.S. President-elect Donald Trump's comments about one of Canada's most valued natural resources.
We have millions of gallons of water pouring down from the north with the snow caps in Canada and all pouring down. And they have essentially a very large faucet.
So President-elect Donald Trump says water from Canada could be diverted to California to reduce water shortages. Now, this is raising concerns over how Canada is protecting currently its water supply. For more this morning, we are joined from Calgary by Tricia Stadnick. She's the Canada Research Chair in Hydrologic Modeling at the University of Calgary. Thanks for joining us so early this morning.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
All right, experts say they think Donald Trump is talking about the Columbia River. So just to give everybody a reference point here, the 2,000-kilometer-long river starts in BC. It then flows through Washington and Oregon before it ends up in the Pacific Ocean, where is this very large faucet that Trump is referring to, and who controls it?
Yeah, so actually there is no faucet at the moment. What he's referring to is the fact that the power of the river, the water in the river, could be harnessed before it reaches the Pacific Ocean. He would do that within American territory, not within Canadian territory. And he's talking about building, which doesn't exist currently, a diversion pipeline to take the water to the drier parts of California.
He has described it as essentially, Canada's letting this water just rush right into the ocean. That actually isn't true. It's used by U.S. industries like fishery, farming, hydroelectricity. U.S. interest in Canada's water, as we know, is not new. All the way back in 2008, there was a report, and it called on then Prime Minister Stephen Harper's government to do more to protect our water. I remember Prime Minister Harper talking about water rights back then. So why is the U.S. so interested again in our water?
Honestly, it's about developing the American economy. And this means investing in growth, both for population in terms of water supply, but also in terms of critical industries such as Silicon Valley. It takes water to run those supercomputers as well as agriculture. And we have more of it than we can use just by sheer population ratios between Canada and the US. And he's looking at it as an opportunity. And this is a geopolitical storm that's created by a vulnerability in our own federal water policy, or lack thereof, that he's trying to exploit at a critical time where the Columbia River Treaty, the river that he's talking about, is already under negotiation between Canada and the U.S.
I guess I'm curious to know then, what are our vulnerable points when it comes to protecting water?
Yeah, so water is actually handled at the provincial and territorial level in Canada, not unlike healthcare is handled, which basically means that each province speaks for its own water. So in the case of the Columbia River, it resides in BC. So it's the BC government that basically controls the water and controls what happens in the Columbia River and speaks for the water treaty between Canada and the US. Canada urgently needs a national priority, policy, directive, and mandate in order to be able to deal with water at the federal level when it comes to federal politics such as this, such as the U.S. being interested in our transboundary water.
I want to ask you about Trump has only doubled down on these 51st state comments. This is ahead of his inauguration, happens next Monday, as a reminder to everybody. What role do our natural resources, like water, play into that?
A huge role from my perspective. This is a play for power, not only in terms of access to water, but access to resource in total. And it's linked to the Greenland comments, and it's also linked to the fact that the Trump administration is well aware, even though they don't have policy on climate change, that climate change is opening up new opportunities for them in the Arctic. And there's a wealth of resources in the Canadian Arctic that they're interested in.
So water is not the only thing that Donald Trump is after.
You're right. The U.S. president-elect is restating his case to buy Greenland.
So what does Greenland have that Trump wants? Well, Alex Dial, senior fellow with the Macdonald-Laurier Institute, breaks it down.
Trump has said that the U.S. needs Greenland for two reasons: national security and economic security. What is he after here?
Well, that's a great question. So there's an excellent view of the world. When you look at this, what you're going to see in real time is that climate change is affecting the Arctic more quickly than anywhere else. And that's creating new opportunities for looking at shipping routes and new resource opportunities. Russia is pushing very hard on that, trying to develop its north, developing new weapon systems, putting in new bases. China, at the same time, wants to model itself as a polar power, is building the icebreaker fleet to go along with that. So the U.S. is looking at these developments with some concern, and has a general sense that it's a bit late to the game in the Arctic, despite the state of Alaska and the fact it too is an Arctic country.
Yeah, I want to put this into a little bit bigger context. So putting aside Donald Trump Jr.'s visit and Trump's tweets, the reality is Greenland is a key part of Canada's Arctic strategy. In Canada, we learned in December, they're setting up a consulate in Greenland. Why is this nation suddenly so important to Canada and to the United States? Is it just security? Is it economics? Is it resources?
I would say it's a little of each of those things, Anne-Marie. It comes up in the new Canadian Arctic strategy, foreign policy strategy that you mentioned 21 times. It is part of North America. It is a Canadian neighbor. It itself has signaled a great deal of interest in having closer ties with its North American neighbors. However, it is part of the Kingdom of Denmark, and that has long been how it's oriented. And its government is also the institutions are very Nordic and European in an Inuit country. So Canada has a few distinct interests, certainly in terms of fisheries, minerals, but more deeply, I think it's the connection of the Inuit peoples of the North. Greenland is an Inuit majority country, and of course that gives it close ties with the other Inuit peoples across the North American North.
I want to talk about security and shipping. So Russia has been setting up military bases in the Arctic along the northeastern route, but the Northwest Passage is seen as a place of potential for transport and business. We're talking trade routes. These sound like conversations people had centuries ago when they were looking for new shipping routes, new trade, new resources. How much potential is there, and how vital is it that the West secures its place in the region?
Well, it's absolutely vital that Canada and the United States and NATO, our European allies, do have a strong defensive and security position. And the issues I spoke to at the beginning, increased interest in economic opportunities, necessitates that. Most of the growth in Arctic shipping is coming in the Russian north, and they are pushing hardest to develop the large icebreaker fleet, et cetera, that's going to be required. It's still a very, very small percentage of international shipping, so we are talking about something that's here for the future. The Northwest Passage through Canada's north is in fact even longer term, likely at least a few decades before it becomes more viable, because climate change is actually making ice conditions more complicated up there for navigation. But that doesn't really get around the basic point that this is sovereign territory of the United States, Canada, and the Kingdom of Denmark, and that it therefore does need to be defended. And we do need, I think you get a sense in the Canadian Arctic strategy, the North American Arctic is now a place we need to think in new ways about security and defense.
New security, new shipping, new trade, and new resources. It is really an interesting story. And part of this story is the fact in Greenland there's this existing issue of independence. And it seems like Donald Trump is trying to stir that up. Could these threats be actually pressure tactics to get Greenland to negotiate, to allow the U.S. more access to shipping, more access to resources?
I think you're absolutely right that these are pressure tactics. That's very much President-elect Trump's style. So it should be understood that, I mean, Denmark and the United States have had a agreement about U.S. positioning of forces in Greenland since after the Second World War. And the United States has a major base that's been rebranded as a space base in northern Greenland. The really key part here to remember is self-determination. Greenland is not empty space. There is 57,000 people living there, and as with many Indigenous people worldwide, they are looking for self-determination. So while they have clearly signaled, including last night, that they are looking for closer relations with Canada, with the United States, and that could include defense and security in the long term. Independence is a question for Greenlanders, and the constitutional arrangement they have with Denmark actually permits for this to happen.
Our next guest says we are living in a real paradox at the moment. We have more access to more knowledge than ever before, and yet, at the same time, less and less certainty about what we're seeing and reading and the actual truth. With clickbait generating algorithms and hyped up headlines screaming misinformation, how are we supposed to weed through all of the fake to reach the facts? this book might help. It is called The Certainty Illusion. Author Timothy Caulfield is joining us in studio. Great to have you here in person, and great to be able to talk about such a timely topic with you.
Oh, unfortunately, the book is more relevant now than when I started writing it. The information environment is just so incredibly chaotic right now. I'm glad that the book is coming out, but alas, I'm also upset it's so needed.
Well, sure. Let's start off by identifying the 3 signposts that most of us use when making decisions about sussing out information. What are those 3 categories?
So I break the book down to what I think people turn to when they're trying to figure out, when they're searching for certainty, right?
Yeah.
We look to science, right? And unfortunately, science is becoming twisted now. We look for informed opinions, right? And that's starting to become twisted too. And we also look for virtuous goals. Like, you know, what should I do to do the right thing? Something in the book I call goodness.
Yeah.
And even that is being exploited and twisted.
Okay, let's delve into that a little bit, starting with science. You talk about something called science-ploitation cycle. What does that term mean, science-ploitation?
So look, you know, everyone knows that we want to have good evidence to make decisions.
Yeah.
We turn to science. And because of that, science is exploited to trick us. I call it science exploitation. So you use good science in order to sell ideas, to sell products, even if it's not relevant. So a really good example is the word microbiome.
Yes,
right?
hear a lot about that.
Yeah, if we got in a time machine and we went back 6-7 years, most people wouldn't even know what the word microbiome meant. Now it's on shampoo bottles, right?
Yeah.
And they do that to give it some legitimacy, to exploit science, to sell ideas.
Well, I spoke with a doctor recently who called it like science marketing. There's science and then science marketing, and those are 2 very different things. Can you talk about the pandemic a little bit? Give us some ideas that you saw from that point in time around this idea of misinformation and people looking for certainty and maybe being guided in the wrong direction.
Well, for sure, the pandemic was an inflection point, right? Where we started to see the polarization of discussion around science, for better or for worse. For worse. A really good example is immune boosting, and this is actually a topic that we've done a lot of research on. You saw that idea rolled out again and again, almost always inaccurately, right? Because it plays to our intuitive desire to do what's right for ourselves, for our family, even though it's not rooted in science. So another really good example of science exploitation, right? And they would, you know, talk about things like precision or the microbiome as a way of justifying products that just don't have good evidence behind them.
Listen, while I have you here, can we talk about your thoughts around Meta ending its fact-checking portion? What do you think about that decision?
Well, I find it depressing. And the reason I find it depressing is more the rhetoric that has justified the move. Look, fact-checking, is it perfect?
You mean Zuckerberg's statement?
Yeah, Zuckerberg's, you know, how Meta is justifying, you know, removing fact-checking. Look, fact-checking, is it perfect? No. Can it get better? Yes. Does it have utility? Absolutely. And community notes, it also could be a useful tool. Misinformation, the spread of lies, it's so complex, we have to come at it from absolutely every direction, use a plurality of tools. He seems to be making this move based solely on politics and the political wins. And we want to have evidence-based, science-informed strategies to help ensure that the public has the evidence that they need.
Talk to me really quickly about mistrust. There's a huge mistrust globally right now in government, in healthcare, in media, in our education systems. Where does this uncertainty play into that?
Oh, it's a huge part of the story. In fact, we have a couple of research projects on this exact topic. And I think that we need to recognize that a lot of that distrust has been created. And that's what the evidence tells us. It's been generated by state actors, by misinformation mongers. They create distrust in order to make room for their narratives, right? For their stories. Can the scientific community, can politicians, can institutions do better? Absolutely. Listen, learn, do better. But don't forget that a lot of this distrust has been created in order to create the situation we're in right now.
Whew, it's a lot to wrap our heads around, but important that we do it. Timothy Caulfield, thank you so much.
Thank you.
If you're looking to add more books onto your reading list, more purposeful reading can go a really long way.
Here are 4 books that anti-racism coach Salem Debs recommends that you read.
These aim to help you challenge ideas about race and better understand the impacts of racism.
What is the first suggestion you have for us?
So there are so many books that we could access, but here are a couple recommendations. We have Between the World and Me by Ta-Nehisi Coates, which is a book where it's basically a letter to his then teenage son, where he speaks on the struggles of racism through the Black experience in the world.
Okay, now book number 2, we are familiar with Desmond Cole. He's been on our show a couple of times. What I really like about your suggestion with this pick is that he weaves his personal experience into the story he's telling.
Absolutely. So Desmond Cole, he's a Black Canadian author, and this book speaks to the struggles of how racism shows up within the Canadian context. But in particular, what he did was he spoke on how racism showed up in the year of 2017 and his personal anecdotes. And often these stories are not told within the Canadian context. So this book is really powerful for that reason.
The third book you have is all about how to have honest conversations about race. Tell us about your pick.
So our third book is So You Want to Talk About Race by Ajama Olu, and she basically speaks on contemporary issues of race and how to have tangible conversations to move away from just reading and starting to move it into our real daily lives.
Lastly, you have a recommendation. This one is called How to Be an Anti-Racist.
Yes, this book is really important because Ibram X. Kendi wrote this book to talk about concepts of race, but then also what it means to take actual action, so anti-racist action in tangible ways.
All right, great book choices. Let's talk about a little bit about the benefits, the other benefits that come with reading anti-racism books like the ones you've selected.
Absolutely, and so it's important for us to understand that media, such as TV, movies, and books, they really give us access to being able to shape our ideas, our perspectives on how we see characters and stories in the world, and how we treat communities, and how to develop an anti-racist lens. And so one of the benefits of taking in all this content is reducing tokenism. And reducing tokenism actually means it's the ways in which sometimes folks in organizations will include representation to appear as inclusive, however, will not have tangible action in place. And we reduce tokenism by ensuring that we have year-round access to characters and stories from Black, Indigenous, and racialized folks. Our second benefit is reducing stereotyping. And stereotyping is seen as unfair and untrue beliefs or narratives about specific groups of people that lead to pathologizing behaviors and that lead to discrimination and inequities. And so we reduce stereotyping by making sure that we include these types of characters and stories all year round. And then the last thing is that we want to spark organic conversations through making sure that curiosity is at the forefront.
Oh, I love that.
Right? And so this benefits everyone. It benefits children, and it helps us to develop perspectives where we inevitably and ultimately begin to reduce the harm perpetuated against communities that are Black, Indigenous, and racialized.
Thanks for listening today.
For more great conversations, you can download or hit subscribe to Your Morning, the podcast on the iHeartRadio app or wherever you get your podcasts.
And don't forget, we'd love for you to watch us live weekday mornings on CTV CTV News Channel or on your CTV News app. Start your morning with us.